Greetings, Allie. How are you?
Well, Chuck, I'm good. How are you?
You look lovely as always.
Thanks.
You are welcome.
Yeah.
So, really good episode today.
Yeah.
And I'm very intrigued and interested and excited about what you're going to talk about. And I'm going to let you lead this thing because this is a relationship that you've been working on and know. And so I don't want to step on your toes, but I want to take 2 seconds if you're cool with it and
Mhm.
just talk about something that we've been working on. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. Podcast. We do a podcast. Did you know that?
We do.
Yes, we do a podcast.
I still am really surprised we do, but we
And
do.
and we're still doing it for some reason,
For
right?
some reason, here
And
we
so
are.
anyway, I think we've got some good things brewing. And so a listing service that we've put on the website to let people who have been reaching out to us for referrals, give them a concrete place to go for some people that we really trust and know.
Hmm.
And also some really good partnerships with people in the mental health community that can offer a lot more than just therapy, but also treatments, med management, all this sort of thing. And so really excited about that. And then of course our Patreon account, not to be too pandering, but we even have that as well. So
We do.
if you can bear with me a second, I'm going to play a few promos.
Maybe one of your kids will give us $5 a month.
I don't
They'll
know.
Venmo you for it.
Yeah,
They'll ask for the
I'm
$5.
thinking they're going to take it out of their allowance or something like that.
Mhm.
All
All
right,
right, here we go.
here we go. Hang tight. Are you in need of a trusted therapist or provider near your home? All the internet sites and directories can be overwhelming. To help, Allie and I have created an exclusive list of providers in your area that we believe in and trust.
While the therapeutic relationship is unique to each individual and the final decision is always up to you, we hope that our trusted listing service can be a good starting point. Visit healingcenter.co to find a trusted therapist near you. As a therapist, I found it is sadly unusual to have a medical provider who is empathetic, knowledgeable, unhurried, and above all else, relentlessly devoted to getting you better. In fact, I never saw it until Dr. Michelle Cochran. Whether it's through genetic testing, an extremely thorough eval, TMS, or nasal esketamine, she finds a way. Being in network with most major insurance companies and now with 3 locations across Middle Tennessee, Dr. Cochran and her team at the Neuroscience and TMS Treatment Center have only multiplied their level of care. Go to our website, healingcenters.co, to learn more or schedule an appointment today.
That's it. Anyway, so if you're listening, check out the website, and we're always going to have some good stuff there, including those 2 promos that you just saw. But now let's get to the good part. Why don't you, Allie, if you could, you want to do a little introduction and kind of get us
Yeah, I'd love
some
to.
orientation to the episode that we're about to do?
Of course. So I think I wanted to take a little bit more time today than what we typically take because this person, it's funny how, I don't know, people that you're friends with, you tend to be a little bit more protective of their vulnerabilities
Sure.
and their courage. You remember, maybe more so than I do other guests, that what it takes to be in this position today. And so this is somebody who over the last year, I've really begun to call a friend. And I think when we think about this episode, I would love for people listening or watching to really know more about how you and I started this. And so we began with your creativity, your genius, desire, and vision to bring fun and life and humor into a topic that typically can be kind of a downer. And also, from my line of work and what I see a lot, I think a huge passion of mine is I see people every day, all day, who feel isolated and shame most of the time, and had a real desire for people to get to hear other people's journeys of courage forward, and how and hopefully it can kind of bring hope and maybe a clear path for them. And so today, just like every other day, that's what this is. It is not clickbait. It is not a juicy gossip story. It is not a tell-all, but it is someone stepping out in courage and vulnerability to offer hope and a path forward to others. So it's also a story of undiagnosed trauma, residential treatment, and a road to recovery. So with that, I feel very, very honored today to introduce my friend at this point, Brandon Hatmaker.
Hey guys.
Hey.
It's so fun how I really did see you all of a sudden.
Isn't that crazy how that works?
It is so crazy. I am not the tech genius of this partnership. So every time I'm like, oh my God,
Allie,
I can't believe I just did that.
Allie, you have many skills.
Hey, there's only room for one tech genius in any environment,
That is
guaranteed.
true. In our team, I'm the youngest. Maybe there's one other person younger than me, and I'm the only one who uses a paper calendar. I'm like,
that's
oh
funny.
God, don't show me on the computer. Just if somebody will send me an email with what to put in my paper calendar. So
Maybe we should spend a little time talking through that, Allie. Are you good?
Yeah, exactly.
No, I'm not. I'm okay to say I'm not.
Me-
I'm not
me-
ready to grow there yet.
Me and Brandon actually worked on this. This is actually for you. We're going to talk to you today.
Right. This is an intervention, Allie.
I'm ready.
Good.
So I want to turn it over to you for a little bit. And
Oh, wow. Okay.
I think there are some people listening today that might already know who you are and be familiar. There are some that wouldn't. And I know that we had talked about starting with just kind of more of a present day where you've been and working our way back, because I think one of the places that you and I connected was through Onsite, which is a residential treatment center outside of Nashville that I really think so highly of and have referred a lot of people to.
Good. Yeah.
And I'm so, so grateful for the way that they pour into people, but even more so sometimes for the people that come out there and really just kind of launch and go with the healing that they were able to be provided with there. And so, when I first kind of connected with you, bizarrely over social media of all things, I saw that we had that in common. And there was something about that string to me that just felt different maybe than other ones. And I felt really tuned into you and what you had to say. And I'd love for you to share some of that, just kind of about your journey there and anything else you want to talk about.
Well, thanks, Allie. No, I think you nailed it. I mean, it's really interesting. I remember, for those who don't know, went through a pretty tumultuous last few years. That through some crazy experiences ended up in divorce and going into residential treatment, kind of going, what's wrong with me? How did I get to here? I don't even recognize myself. How did I get here? What is even wrong with me? Am I an alcoholic? Do I have some kind of strange other disorder? What's going on? All I know is I find myself and I don't recognize myself. And so I did have the honor and opportunity to be able to go to Onsite. And for those who know Onsite, a lot of my friends have known Onsite, know them as a place that does like weekly retreats and marriage retreats, and you go in for 5 or 6, 7 days, and things. But their milestone program is it's a residential program that starts at 31 days. So for those who don't know, I mean, it's no cell phones, no computers, no TV. You can bring some books, and it's 12 hours a day of one-on-one therapy, counseling, group therapy, education, which was huge, but their focus is on trauma. And so it was a really incredible experience for me. So when I came back, and I mean, the reality is you're not whole when you come back. You just have a lot of information in your brain, and you start maybe learning some ways to process things better and things like that. But when I came back and finally, maybe after a little while, reached out a little bit on social media just to share some things that I felt that I was really feeling, that I was sorting through and learning about myself and learning about recovery. And I can't remember if you made a comment on it or something like that, but you had made a comment on one of my posts and it was super encouraging. But I felt the same affinity that you did. I felt like, that was like a real honest thing that someone, like, I felt like you really heard what I was saying. Like you weren't looking for an agenda, or I wasn't, what's he really saying or whatever. Like there's just, you heard me. And so I think I told you that was encouraging to me, and you told me that you had worked some with Onsite or in the area, and some of your background with trauma and things like that. So it really felt very safe to talk with you in that environment. And so thank you for inviting me into your space now to kind of be a part of.
You're very brave. You reached out like a month or so after we had kind of started developing a friendship, and you're like, hey, if there's anybody I can ever help, let me know. And I was like, okay, great. We have a podcast. And Brandon was like, that's not what I was thinking when I said that. So
yeah, and here I am. No, you know what? I wasn't thinking that either. I've had interesting amount or different kinds of people invite me to be a part of what they're doing or to be on a podcast, because this is the first thing I've done in a couple of years. And but to be with someone who understands the background of what my journey entailed. I wasn't looking for, I wasn't looking for it at all, but some huge platform or this or that or whatever. I just want to, as you live out your story, I can't help but always think that maybe someone else could be helped from that
Right.
story,
Right.
or could be helped to be able to identify and understand, what they're going through themselves, and maybe even save some relationships and save some heartache. And um, I just know there can be good that comes out of anything eventually.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
just seemed like that opportunity and a real safe place to do that. So
Yeah.
thanks for inviting me to come on and share a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for people who don't know more about your background,
Hmm.
that you did have a pretty high profile background up to this point. You were in ministry, which I think that in and of itself just adds such a huge weight. People like who depend on you and are looking to you, and a big influence as
Yeah.
far as social media and your books that you had written. There was a lot riding on. I can imagine if I were in your position, there was a lot of pressure
Hmm.
leading up to that point. I mean, I think
Hmm.
going through what you've been through is devastating no matter what.
Hmm.
But I think it adds another layer
Hmm.
when there's kind of this filter that you've been living through for so long, that people have really become attached to, and you feel a responsibility in that leadership.
Oh, you do. And I think those who are in nonprofit leadership or faith-based leadership and things like that, those people are very hard to serve.
Mhm.
Um, and I would say this, the majority of my life had been oriented around some kind of service industry or faith-based something, nonprofits, whatever, that was always giving, giving away. And I've always had a hard time receiving.
Mhm.
And as I went through, and I know we'll talk about my story some in a little while, but as I go through that, some of my friends would come back to me and just say, "Man, I'm sorry I wasn't there for you." And the truth is, I honestly don't know if they could have done anything for me.
Mhm.
And it's because I didn't know how to be helped. And I think it's hard. People don't know how to serve their leaders or to help their leaders,
Yeah.
who usually have to stand in that gap for them and give them direction. And so that's a small part of it,
Mhm.
for sure. I think that a lot of people deal with. I have a really good friend named Brian Carpenter, who has an incredible organization in Montana where he just serves leaders. That's all he does, and it's just such a amazing organization, and it tunes in to that desire and that need, where people are isolated in certain situations. And then that pressure of that, you mentioned a little bit of the celebrity stuff. Not, I mean, there are many levels of celebrity, and I was like really way down, really way down
You're on it though.
those levels.
Depends
So,
on what circle you're in as far as where you ranked on that. In some circles, I would say
right.
you're high. You're high up.
Right. Well, it just depends what circle. There are bigger circles out there, but yeah, and the expectations on you and the pressure on you and to be involved or have something to say or to always be on point or whatever it may be. And it's interesting, you if you're involved with something with you and your spouse or you and your family, whether it's you never claiming you're the best family or best marriage ever, everybody assumes that's what you think you're doing.
Mhm.
And
Mm.
and so there is an added pressure to those things because you're just in everyone's eye, and you learn to take criticism well, and you learn to just understand that everybody has, an opinion, but it's still hard. It still hurts when things aren't going right. And but that pressure is certainly there. And I think that it begins to take over a little bit the way you view yourself
Mhm.
and how you value yourself
Mm.
and where you gain your, let's call it strokes, for lack of a better word, that
Yeah.
affirmation or that
Right.
Yeah.
that sense of identity.
Mhm.
Um, and when you start getting into and this is the biggest thing for me, I've learned so much over the last few years just about how the neurology of everything, like how our brain really works when it comes to trauma and things like that. And it's it's not a choice when something triggers an emotional response and you have this specific feeling, because your brain is mapped to do that. It's not a choice to feel angry or mad or sad or whatever about that, but to understand how those things work. um I can't even remember how I got to where I was going with that, guys.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just think
No,
you're talking about like when people have a certain perception of you,
right,
put
right,
together.
right. Yeah. And so when you hear every day, whether it's just on a Sunday, hey, great sermon, or an email that really moved me, or message after message on social media, or DMs or likes or whatever, you can't help but begin to assign more value to that than you probably should.
Yeah, again, it's not
And
a choice, it's your neural pathways in your brain that begin to respond to that and
yeah, that's
want
what I
more.
meant. That's what I meant by what I just said, what you said right there.
Yeah, no, you're good.
But you just live into that and you don't even realize it. You do a little bit. It feels good when you're like, oh man, I got that many likes on that. Or
Mhm.
well,
Right.
that feels good. But when you really recognize it is when it goes away
Mm,
and it's just super gone, super fast.
yeah.
And I think that, in my story, um, um, wow, probably now I have to do the math on it, probably 5 to 7 years ago now, man, I've just felt like on top of the world. Things were going so amazing, or it seemed to be.
Mhm.
Um, we were my family and my wife at the time. Our marriage was going well. Our careers were flourishing. There was a sense of celebrity that was rising in that time. And I'll be honest with you, it was a pretty dramatic uh, thing that happened. I had a book that came out in October of, I think, 16,
Mhm.
and I was just had done a book tour with that, and but we were going through a real personal shift in our theology regarding LGBTQ,
Mhm.
which became a very public thing, if you know our story at all.
Mhm.
Growing up very conservative evangelical Christianity, that's a tough conversation to have, right?
Mhm. It really,
Especially in church leadership.
oh
And
gosh, can't even imagine.
yeah, and so you have to tread lightly. And I had always felt like a peacemaker, a bridge builder, and trying to be, that. But we'd spent several years just really engaging justice issues around the world, and started a donor advised fund that similar to a nonprofit that granted nonprofits around the world to just try and engage systemic issues that maybe we could find solutions to. And you just begin to train your eyes to see pain and experience pain around you, and you see
Mm,
that, and just could not reconcile personally the pain of the LGBTQ community related to church and faith, and really spent a lot of time pressing into that privately,
mm,
um, and had come to a personal conclusion, that the majority of my life that I was wrong on how
yeah.
my stance on
Mhm.
LGBTQ, and
Hey, Brandon, quick
yeah,
question. Super sorry. Does that happen overnight,
oh my goodness.
or is that just a drawn out, slow
For
process?
for me, and I would say for us, we literally spent a year going, this feels wrong. So can we spend a year studying scripture, studying books, studying science, talking to people, getting to
Mhm.
know people, having conversations, literally a year, even with the elders with our church,
Mhm.
about are we handling this faithfully? Are we
Mhm.
being are we handling this faithfully? Because I just really believe in a redemptive gospel. And when it seems like we're applying the gospel to this conversation, there doesn't seem to be redemption,
Mhm.
the way we were.
It's a powerful
Yep.
statement.
Yep.
And so, yeah, over a year. And then we were very convinced, and dedicated ourselves to nearly another year of saying, man, literally praying, God, if we're wrong, tell us. We don't want to lead people
Mm,
astray, but we want to lead people towards truth. And um, so we actually had a plan to kind of go public with where we were in the spring of that next year. And the
Mhm.
only reason for the delay of that is because we had a lot of people, agents and publishers and people we had spoken at their events and leaders in the church and things like that that it impacted. There's a collateral impact on all those around us that either were responsible for us or financially something connected us or something like that. We felt like we had to steward that well and to be
Mhm.
able to clear our path well from that. I had a book come out in the beginning of October, and at the end of October that year, a story leaked out um, that had from an interview that uh, kind of preempted our
Mhm.
being able to, share that with the people that we loved and the people we cared about and the people that were in our lives. And it went really big,
Yeah. Yeah.
really fast. And our church found out about it on Facebook. Our
Gosh, how painful.
publishers, yeah, and so that's one thing, right? But the conservative church was so brutal to
Mm.
us. I mean, crushing. Like you cannot, it's just crushing. The things that were said and done, crushing. We had our books pulled off of every bookstore and Christian bookstore in America. We had books burned and sent back and mailed to our house.
Gosh.
Um, just, it just, I mean, people publicly questioning our, everything about everything we've ever done. So it was really brutal. And there was a season there of trying to press through it and healing and coming through that. But the truth is in one day I lost my entire platform.
Mhm.
I lost everything that I had been building towards,
Mhm.
and I didn't realize how deeply I lost my identity in
Mhm.
that. I slowly began to it's funny how you can move from sadness to anger to resentment very quickly.
Mhm.
And I very quickly was so frustrated and confused and just angry at God
Mhm.
because I felt like he had led us into something that now we were all alone.
Mhm.
And it was very disorienting for me. Very,
Yeah.
very, very disorienting for me because and I think about, we talk about trauma and we talk about moving towards the different layers of things that have happened in our lives and move us towards this point where I finally hit rock bottom. And there were many layers that were going on. That was the first one for me. It wasn't a full loss of faith, but it was a type of loss of faith that
Mhm.
had been the cornerstone of my entire life,
Yeah.
where I finally stood up and thought, I felt very hopeless. And
Mhm.
I felt like I could no longer teach and not have any kind of integrity on where I felt this was going and what I had known and believed all along.
Mhm.
It was just very daunting. I felt very alone with that. And I think that in the beginning of that, um, uh, my ex-wife, Jen, and it affected us in different ways.
Mhm.
And I think because of the type of leadership I was in, I was unable to recover
Mhm.
while she was.
Mhm.
And honestly, that's not her fault, but I just felt left behind. And it was really weird.
Mhm.
It was really weird. It was hard to find my legs.
Yeah.
Um, but that loss of faith was the very beginning for
Mhm.
me of just being very disoriented about what I was doing and why I was doing. I was exhausted. I was exhausted of constantly giving out
Mhm.
to be received in that kind of way in that
Mhm.
time. And that was like the beginning of a downward spiral that eventually became incredibly out of control.
Yeah.
Um, but that loss of faith, loss of identity, loss of career. And at the same time, I had just gone through a couple of surgeries for my body. I was getting older. I was getting in my 40s.
Well, your
And it
trauma
was just,
catching up to your
pardon?
body, right? Your body was
Well,
catching up. I
yeah.
mean, it's just so interesting how I think that's one thing I wish we would talk about more is how much our bodies
Hmm.
hold our trauma.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And when we don't
Yeah.
really lean into the emotional part of us, our bodies hold it. And gosh, I mean, I just can't imagine the impact of those two things at the same time.
Yeah. Well, we talked about that too. The book, The Body Keeps a Score. I remember
Mhm,
reading that going, oh my gosh, like
mhm,
this is exactly what I'm feeling,
mhm. It's
you
unreal.
know?
Yeah.
But, just going through different experiences, and some of mine were just injuries, from old sports injuries and things like that. But um, I had had back surgery, and I was having nerve pain, constant nerve pain.
Mhm,
And my back doctor put me on gabapentin.
mhm.
And I remember shortly after that going through some of these things. I had always never really understood depression, to be honest with you.
Mhm.
I had always been the guy who's like, hey, if you're sad, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I
Right.
don't understand. I've never understood suicide. I'd
Mhm.
always felt like it's incredibly selfish, that
Mhm.
it was I mean, how could anyone ever see that as a solution or something like that until all of a sudden you are looking to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you don't even have boots on?
Wow.
And I found myself at one point there I literally just depressed as I could. It's the only way I could describe it.
Mhm.
And it's strange because I instantly went, I don't know why I had never looked at it, but one of the side effects of gabapentin for some people is depression or suicidal
Mhm.
thoughts and things like that. And I knew instantly that's what it was. And I stopped taking it. And within 2 months, I was back,
Wow.
100% back. I didn't feel sad. I wasn't. So it was really interesting
Mhm.
because I had started having those. And I don't know if once that neural pathway is opened up, if you can easily return to that space or what.
Yeah. I think I mean, it's so different for every
Yeah,
brain,
yeah,
literally. I think that's
yeah,
part of what is so hard about psychology that isn't there for a back surgeon or a heart surgeon, as
yeah, yeah,
every brain is so different, and it's really hard for us to
yeah,
be able to pinpoint something like that.
yeah. Well, it was a dark time. It
Mhm.
was a real dark time. It was very disorienting. Um, and a handful of other things were going on. I think with my family, some private things, some public things, that would just feel like a beat down, one thing after another. Health issues with my dad, they were just brutal.
Mhm.
Some very private things with our family that was really tough
Yeah.
to go through with our kids. And um, um, it seemed like there was one thing after another that were just things that you can get through on their own.
Mhm.
Different kinds of loss, but they just kept adding up. But still, things that seemed like you can get through this. You can find it, but it was just affecting everything.
Mhm.
It was affecting my relationship with my wife. We were finding we were going through all these things together, but we were making it through on our own
Mhm. Yeah.
and just not able to find that path together.
And don't you think when you're hitting with loss that creates chaos and crisis, that it's really hard to even think about? Like, when I think about
Yeah,
you in that
yeah.
situation, it's like, gosh, you're having such a panic response in your brain.
Hmm.
It's really difficult. I don't know if I would
Yeah,
say impossible, but maybe to make sure, hey, we're going through this together. Like,
yeah,
you have to, like, you tend to
yeah,
find your own coping skills
yeah,
and think we'll
yeah.
kind of come out to the other side of this and reconnect or
I,
something.
I
But
think sometimes you look at each other and you just think, man, you're such a sturdy person that you got to be okay, or that it's just going to self correct or fix itself. And that doesn't always happen. And
yeah, I think when you put more power in that person versus the trauma that you're experiencing, I think that's
yeah,
exactly what happens.
yeah, it's interesting. I think about I know it is forms, and people need to think about everyone has trauma, different forms, different
Mhm,
levels, and it affects our development, whether it's childhood trauma or adult trauma or whatever. It affects us. It's the reason why we think certain ways and we feel certain ways. And to identify where it's coming from is one of the most significant things, because then you can understand that maybe it's not that person in front of you that you're really angry with,
mhm.
or you deal with that situation differently because you understand where those emotions and those feelings are coming from. But if you don't know what's going on or where it's coming from, you're just reacting.
Yep.
And I don't know, I heard this at one point. I don't know the full truth to it, but I heard that not that many years ago, the general thought process was that your mind told you how to feel, and that there's been a shift in understanding that truly your feelings tell your mind how to think, and that trauma informs those feelings, and then it interprets and that then impacts the way you think and execute whatever's in front of you.
Yeah.
And it seems very true. But I never really saw those things as trauma. I didn't understand that. I knew those were hard times, and I knew those were affecting me. And I was always prided myself as a sturdy person and whatnot. And so here's how you would experience me in those times. I was just distant and I was angry. I was just distant and angry. I was untouchable. And it was very hard. And it was very hard. And so much division grew for about 3 years, just just spiraling down for me. But again, each one of those things seemed like something that in and of itself was they were hard, but not overcomable, if that makes sense. And then I had an incident that same year that I know now was life altering for me. And I was with a group of friends at a bike rally, a motorcycle rally, and we were on a golf cart and we were driving around. And it was earlier in the evening. And I turned a corner and a buddy of mine that was on the back fell off the cart and he fell down and he went onto the concrete. And I came around. I thought he was joking. I watched it. It was like in slow motion. I thought he was kidding. And I was like, Scott, get up, whatever. And he rolls over and he's obviously was not kidding. There was blood coming out of his nose and out of his ear.
Gosh.
And he was in and out of consciousness at the time. And long story short, the ambulance took him into the ICU and he had a pretty intense brain injury. And he was, for the first couple of days, he came in and out of consciousness and he was intubated and he was in ICU and he came out for a little bit, but then went back under. And literally from June 9th until August 22nd, 2.5 months, every single day, I sat in the ICU and watched one of my best friends die.
Gosh, Brandon.
And just to see him every single day lose another 2, 3, 4 pounds. He lost like 90, 100 pounds. He's a big man. His skull was cut out to relieve the pressure, and it was brutal. It was very, very brutal. And something happened in that experience for me where I was officially lost. I was gone. That was like the final straw, domino, whatever for me. And I just gave up. I 100% gave up. And I remember one night, it was my night. We all took turns from my motorcycle club, staying the night at the hospital. And I remember the night that I saw, and I just knew he wasn't there anymore. And I went and got a bottle of Jameson, and I still had a hydrocodone from my back pain. And I popped both and drank both and jumped on my bike and took off. And it was just this beginning of this downward spiral that I can't even recognize myself in that moment and in that time. And it was just, I was lost.
Yeah.
I was lost, and I felt no one around me saw me. No one around me understood it. Everyone experienced me not as hurting, but as just angry, I think. I was more mad at God. I was more mad at my wife. I was more mad at my friends who didn't get it. It was just very disorienting. And the funny thing is everything on the outside supposedly is great, but you're so fractured from how you're really feeling inside. And I had
there that the misalignment that you were having to live in. And I can imagine, because your platform was gone, it felt like survival to make sure that other thing of everything's okay was intact, so that you could keep at least that wheel going.
You try for a while.
Gosh.
You try for a while, and then you just, I have a friend who does a lot of work with PTSD soldiers. And he said something to me that really resonated. He said, most of my friends and the guys I work with massive PTSD from war, that PTSD typically does not in itself create new issues for them. Typically, it just strips them of their ability to deal with the things they used to be able to deal with. And And then their lack of coping skills or mechanisms, that may lead to drinking or drug abuse or this or that, or that creates more problems. And then that trauma creates trauma. And I think that's one of the things that I experienced was this this shame cycle of doing anything you can to try and feel, and that being something out of character for you typically, and then you're feeling worse because of that. So you come back to doing something else destructive to try and cover up the pain or the guilt or the shame or whatever.
Yeah, and I
it's
think
just
just
this
to
terrible
tolerate
cycle.
it.
Pardon
I
me?
mean, just to tolerate that shame and emotion, it's almost just like it's so
Yeah.
intolerable in those places.
Yeah.
You do anything out of that panic response
Right.
to just be able to
Right.
be in that moment.
And it's crazy because here, Ali, here is the hardest thing for me that I never want to. I did things that I will regret for the rest of my life that I wish I could undo. Go ahead.
Yeah.
And you never want to make it sound like you're making an excuse for those things, you know? Like you want to own it. You want to own where you were and what you did. And so you can heal from it and you can grow, and not allow that to define you,
Right.
But you don't want it to sound like, well, this was going on, so that's why I did that, so it's okay. And no, it's just not. There's no excuse. There's no excuse that makes it okay to do certain things in life. And for me, in my life, I felt so lost and so distant, and it affected my marriage so deeply. And we just felt like it was going to keep self-correcting. And it seemed like no matter amount of counseling I would go to or try and figure out what was going on with me or whatever, we just could not reconnect for over 3 years. There's just a complete disconnect of intimacy and complete disconnect from closeness. And we were just doing life. And here is me over here just getting more mad and angry and needing someone or needing something to fix me, and I don't even know what's going on with me. And just destructive. But I will tell you this, I didn't realize until just that experience with Scott. And I remember, and I'm not going to speak, I'm not going to speak for Jen on things, but she did say something to me at one point that I know was incredibly true. And she said that, I know that we lost you when you lost Scott. And it was true. It was true. And that started a 3-year spiral. That was just brutal.
Yeah.
And I didn't recognize anything to feel, anything to do, doing things that were so out of character for myself, wasting money in stupid and ridiculous ways. And after, just 3 really tough years, in those times, I just felt my marriage was over, that it had been over. And we could not recover. We could not reconnect. We could not find one another. And I just gave up. I remember, it is funny. It's not funny, but it's just crazy how you can move so quickly to finding something to be resentful about and turning it into entitlement.
Yeah.
And justifying, your actions, and then after 26 years of marriage, I ran into someone who seemed to be an ally to me and emotionally began to connect with her. And after a couple of months, it became physical. First time, only time, greatest regret of my life.
Wow.
And it was about 2 months later that it was exposed. And just brutal, just ugly and destructive and harmful and hurtful. And I swore for 3 years that I wasn't going to do it backwards, that I would never do something like that, that I would. And that's why I say this to those who are struggling out there in their marriage, that just do, I mean, you've got to come to it and do head on that it's not going to self-correct itself. And especially those of you who, it's just so funny. They think about it at times. I thought, man, the last thing I want to do is hurt the people that I love. And you end up hurting them even more.
Yeah.
Hey, Brandon, what do you mean? And Allie too. I think I know exactly what you mean, but I've never heard it said like that. Self-correcting.
Mhm.
I think, I grew up in a household where, emotions weren't necessarily shared, and they're
Right.
pretty much, is that self-correcting? Is that where you just you just keep rolling?
Yeah, I think that self-correcting means you got an issue, and then you, or maybe have a fight, or you have something you need to work on, and you acknowledge that it's something you need to work on, and then you just never do anything. Maybe
Yeah.
you wait for the other person to make the first move, and they never do, so you don't.
Mhm.
Maybe you don't know how to. Maybe you don't know how to speak to each other. Maybe you don't know how to hear each other.
I mean, to your point though, I mean, just in all fairness, I think in any relationship, a certain amount of self-correction is valid.
Oh,
There's
absolutely.
going to
Yeah.
be a bad mood in
Hmm.
some household at some
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
and if the other one's taking it personal, that's
Yeah.
just let's talk about it the next day. So where's the line between
Yeah.
self-correction and really?
I think there's a difference when you know that, ooh, this is a bad mood thing, and when you know I've lost connection with
Right.
you.
Hmm.
And I think in that place where I've lost connection with you, I mean, I know I've been there in my own marriage at times. It feels so vulnerable and scary. And
Hmm.
I think when you feel without tools, especially if you're someone who's used to being able to fix things,
Yeah. Yeah.
it
Yeah.
feels like so unknown. I wouldn't even say that
Yeah.
it necessarily feels overwhelming or scary, because I think people who are used to holding things are used to the scary things. I think it feels
Hmm.
so unknown that you don't really know what to do with it.
Yeah. You don't.
Like, you kind of just say like, "Ooh, that one I don't know how to touch."
Yeah.
Now the
Right.
nonprofit where we're saving kids who can't eat, I got that one. Like,
Right.
I got so many tools for that,
For
and
sure.
this feels way more admirable, so I'm gonna
Mm.
go do that, and, like, we've been holding each other since we were teenagers. We'll figure it out, and I
Yeah.
think it kind of just I think there's something empowering, and I wanted to say this earlier when you were talking about there's no excuse. 100%. We all have to own our stuff. And for people who are listening in that place of shame and maybe isolation, and they have something that they haven't exposed yet, or that feels unknown, I think they might hear that and go, see, there's no excuse. And kind of you keep spiraling. And I'm like, there's no
Mhm.
excuse. And also, life is so real.
Right.
And
But there's a reason. There's no excuse, but there's a reason,
there is a
and there's
reason.
you got there somehow. And
Yeah.
so if you neglect really giving yourself to space to understand that, then there's no healing beyond that, because you can't it's not that you let yourself off the hook, but you can actually go back and go, oh my gosh, that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
neurologically, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And you can believe in yourself a little bit, maybe even when no one else will.
Because you let
And
yourself off the hook
yeah.
in a
But
way.
you
And I know
mentioned something, Allie, I think is really critical. You talked about coping.
Mhm.
And I think it's really important. I hope everyone, I didn't even know what a coping skill was. I didn't know about
In this
mindfulness
helping profession, you didn't know that.
unless you're no,
Gosh.
no, no. I mean, straight up. I mean, to really understand. But first of all, I had never gone through an experience. And this is your world, so we assume everybody knows this,
Mhm.
but people don't understand how their childhood trauma, their experiences as adults really affect the way they think and the way they feel and the trigger mechanism and different things. And so why they're having this emotion. I've been told my whole life, you're angry, that's bad. Finally, someone said, no, you're angry. Why? And you
Mm.
go, oh, because of this. And then, well, why? Because of that. Okay, that's understandable. You know what? You should be angry. That should piss you off that happened.
Yep.
But what can you do about that? And just the exercise of processing that way is such a game changer, because I didn't know how to do that. I would try and say, here's how I feel. And I would just make everybody angry around me. Like I'm accusing them of and I just like, this is how I feel. I don't know how to fix it.
Mhm.
And so what did then you go to? Well, it sure was easy just to go drink,
Mhm.
you know? or go do things that were exciting or made you feel something or whatever. And those are all coping, poor coping skills. Um, um,
I always tell people in those places when they come in my office, I say, you're actually doing a great job because you're searching for a coping skill.
yeah,
We just got to
good.
replace it with one that like launches you
Right.
versus you wake up and you realize you're further down. I mean, I
Yeah.
think our
Yeah.
bodies know how to protect us and get us
Yeah.
out of that space. But if we're not educated
Yeah.
on the outside, we're always going to pick up one of those.
Allie, that's super important because one of the things that I struggle with and that I was really grateful for going from Milestones is because they're trauma based.
Mhm.
Because if you were to look at my life, you would think, oh, this all happened because you're an alcoholic. The truth is that I'm not an alcoholic.
Mhm.
And if all I did was deal with drinking, then I would have filled it with a different negative coping mechanism. I would have dealt because I did. I stopped drinking for 3 months. I still drink now, but I don't drink during the week. I might have, I'll have some on the weekend or something like that. I'm not an alcoholic, but it's what I used. I abused alcohol
Right.
as a coping mechanism,
Right.
and I abuse these different things. And if I just deal with those things, then all I'm going to do is find another negative coping skill or thing to deal with that if I don't deal with the trauma, with the root of it.
Mhm.
And so when I came to Milestone, it actually ticked me off because I wanted to talk about why I blew my marriage up. And they wouldn't let me talk about anything but my childhood for the first 2 weeks.
Gosh, so powerful. I'm so grateful for a place like that. Seriously.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was good, man, because I saw things that I never knew. I never knew that had impacted me and shaped some of the things that I have to struggle with today as an adult.
Mhm.
And some of the things, your parenting styles, things like that, that are there, different generations parent differently and how it affects how you parent today and things like that. But some really, really important things that then began to that were the filter in which my adult trauma was seen through.
Mhm.
But to give yourself permission to really say, this is real, guys, like that really affects you. That really affected who you are and how you think and how you feel. And it's something I just wish everybody knew and that it really mattered.
Brandon and Allie, educate me a little bit. What is the strategy on working through your childhood for 2 weeks
Oh, wow.
before, what is the why is that? Why go
I
there
love that
first?
you brought that up, and I would love for you to speak to it as you feel comfortable. But I think the main
Yeah.
thing I wanted to say when you first talked about on-site and milestones at the beginning is I think I hear so many people who have come in, and I typically see people in really traumatic states, or they've been to 4 or 5 providers at this point, and they're like, "But I don't want to be hospitalized." I'm like, "Okay,
Right. Like that's defeat.
hospitalization,
Right.
but there's also residential treatment." And I
Right.
think what you experience, I think it's so
It
good
was
for people to
right.
know there's something besides a hospitalization,
Right.
and that it really is more of that, like, it's not a medical perception, even though there
Right.
is that factor, but it's more so understanding, like, hey,
Right.
we're going to create safety for you here, for
Yeah.
you to tolerate the discomfort. And it gives me
Right.
chill bumps every time. We're still going to hold you.
Right.
Whatever comes up, like, we're going to be here and contain,
Right.
and in more than like a 50-minute session so that you don't have to put it
Yeah.
real fast. So, yeah, I'd
That
love for you to
that
talk.
might have been the first place I've ever experienced. And then because I did go to AA for a little while, just to definitely was having pre-signs of you don't get this under control, you could become an alcoholic kind of a deal. And just wanted to get into that environment more. And it was a similar feeling, but where I was in an environment where I could say anything and I would not surprise one person in the room.
Mhm.
Not one person would go, oh, dang,
Hmm.
and it's just, you don't have that. And I grew up in church. I've never had that.
Which is how church should be.
Isn't that sad?
Mm.
Isn't that sad? But you know what? We're people and we don't, that environment it's created for that, in
Mhm.
which is what church should be. But
Yeah.
we're learning and we're growing. Right. And so
Yeah.
for me, it's so important. And we talked about this a little bit, Allie, that my, the kinds of treatment that is available and that really work, and that it's really important not to underthink that, because I've had different experiences. I was in counseling for 3 years. That was okay. Okay, it was good. Once every 2 weeks, once a month, whatever. It was good. I was to be honest with you, at the beginning, it wasn't that helpful because when I got to start focusing on myself, it was the first time I ever got to be really selfish about myself. And then I started getting angry and I didn't know how to deal with that. And it was too slow for me.
Mhm.
Um, my but it was helpful to begin, to begin that journey. I think about, we've talked about it. I think the Enneagram is very, very powerful to
Yeah, me too.
understand yourself also in a relationship. What does it look like when a 2 is married to a 3? What are
Mhm.
your strengths? What are your dangers? What are all these things? But it can also be very, very dangerous when you focus on your partner's Enneagram more than your own.
Mhm.
Like, because you can go, I know this is because of your deal,
Mm.
and then that could be a
Yeah,
very
yeah.
dangerous thing. It's like trying to get in a fight after one day of learning karate. Just enough, enough to get your butt kicked.
Right.
Good.
um, and so you have to be careful with how much you pour in, just a little bit to things here and there. My first exposure with any kind of antidepressants, do you know where I got it? I called one of these daily men's clinics
Mm.
towards the beginning of COVID, and they say, man, I feel depressed, and then I'm having bouts of anxiety. They put me on Lexapro over the phone and prescribed me Xanax that they prescribed up to 4 times a day taking Xanax. Uh, and I'm telling you right now, you
I
want
didn't
me
know
to
that.
go, pardon me?
I said I didn't know that piece, that it was that much.
Uh,
Goodness.
If you and I would have some anxiety, I would have whatever. I tell you, it would be gone. But I'll tell you this right now, that I would not feel a thing, and I did not care about a thing. I did not at all, not one thing.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, you combine that with a little bit of drinking and a little bit of depression and everything else, and it's just destructive. And when I was doing my I had 2 weeks after I moved out. Before I went to Milestone, I stayed with my brother and sister, and I didn't drink at all or anything like that. And um, I was doing my in processing, and they were talking about what medications are you on, blah 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 blah. Alprazolam, is that the Xanax name? Anyways, and I said I was on that, and they go, no, go throw it away right now.
Mhm.
I'm
Yeah.
like, what? This is prescribed. And they said, no, go throw it away right now. And I poured it all out in the toilet, just boom, gone.
Yeah.
And I just, as I look back and I know how it affects me, I'm gone. It was it was terrible. It was terrible for me. Gabapentin, same thing. Um, counseling in certain ways and certain, it's it's really interesting. I was really grateful. I did not really want to go to Milestone, but I did.
Mhm.
Um, but just the immersion of it was so significant.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm super grateful. I'm super grateful for that time. I really
Yeah,
am.
and I think if you're in the midst of a crisis or not, to answer your question, I think we just don't value those years of our life enough, because I think we talk about it in such a nostalgic, kind of funny way if something did happen. But to really realize that's when our brain was being
Develop,
made.
right. Your
Like it
first your first sexual experience, if it was negative, your first,
Yeah.
remembering of severe fear or pain, all of those things, yeah,
Like, it's
is
like how
developmental,
as our brain is developing in that space,
right?
that then becomes our filter,
Yeah.
whether we know it or not. And
Mhm.
so I think when you look at childhood stuff, one of the things I always tell people is like, "I don't know, I don't remember anything really." That's, like, pretty much the first thing. I'm like,
Mhm.
"You might picture yourself right now in a lunchroom with, like, a blue cement wall, and it feels so random. Can you talk about that?" And they're like, "Okay, well, there is one of those."
Right,
It's
exactly.
just and I'm like, "Let's start there." I mean, it's amazing
Yeah,
what our brain holds.
yeah,
But we kind of talk about it in this, like, fairy tale way, but a
yeah,
lot of life happened, and not just that it happened, our brain was being made
right,
in the process, and
But
so
right.
to
isn't that
discount
also
it.
a time to just establish, I would expect trust, that you're not digging into the very specific traumatic experiences that you may be feeling at the moment, but you're just spending time just building relationship and trust with the people you're working with. Would that be
Yeah, and
true?
to go on what you said about therapy, I think I feel kind of the same way about church, and that's my own stuff, as they do about the therapy world of, like, people come to people in this profession, and med management, residential, anything mental health, and think like these people are trusted, because it has to be safe in order to bring yourself to that place. And
Mhm.
it's just like any other profession. There's going to be people that know how to handle your stuff and people who don't. And I
Right.
think
You're right.
when you walk into it with the lens of everybody
Right.
here's safe, everybody here's equipped, nobody would meet me if they couldn't, they're made for this. That's actually not the truth.
Right.
And so I see
Yeah.
people all the time when I
It's dangerous. Yeah.
yeah, the first session, I always tell people, I am not the best fit for everybody. And every mental health professional should say that.
Mhm.
Because if you walk away from this and didn't get what you need, you're going to think it's because of therapy. And it's not, it's because of me.
That's fair.
Like,
That's good to say, Allie. I like that.
and so
Thank
I
you for
think for
sharing that.
you to have on-site, like that
Mhm.
was different. And
Oh
so
my goodness.
hearing you right now and going, I'm in
Yeah.
therapy. I'm already doing that. So I really am hopeless if he got out and I didn't. It's like, no, no, no. You're just not
Yeah.
where you need to be.
Right. Do you know what was really surprising for me? And EMDR.
Mm, yeah.
That was my
So
most
crazy.
significant breakthroughs
Yep.
was through EMDR. And for those of you who don't know what that is, EMDR, it does you do physical things like either moving your eyes back and forth while you're recalling or telling a story, a scene from your life or a traumatic experience. Sometimes you can hold these things that vibrate back and forth. And the reason the back and forth is forces you to engage both sides of your brain as you're retelling the story, right? Am I saying that correctly?
Yep, exactly.
And so as you retell this story, you're using both sides of your brain, it allows you to actually recall it as it actually was. And you can kind of remap the emotions around those experiences, right?
Yep.
And so I did that with several different scenes, that I had been through in my life, whether self-inflicted or not. And but the most traumatic one for me, this may sound weird, but I'm telling you, this happened. I carried so much guilt and shame from Scott's death. It was just really strange.
Mm,
Like I kind of felt like I was there in that evening to kind of take care of my guys, and I didn't.
Mhm.
And it's funny, it's bringing up emotion to me now because I've really come through a lot of it. I mourn his death, obviously, and the season that I went through with that. But so I did it, but it's interesting, you go to the hospital and I'm thinking the whole time, my God, this is my fault. And everyone's telling me this isn't your fault. It's okay. It's not your fault. And I'm thinking, I never told you I thought it was my fault. So everyone telling me it's not my fault just is reinforcing that it
oh, yeah.
Yes.
probably is, And so dealing with all this stuff. And so anyways, I'm doing EMDR at Milestones. I did 2 major sessions with it. And but I carried so much guilt. Whenever that conversation came up, just instant guilt and just feels like the final straw for everything in my life. And the night after my second session, and I've heard this is common, that stuff happens, weird things happen in your dreams
Mhm.
after EMDR. I dreamt the scene from Good Will Hunting
Wow.
where Robin Williams was hugging me, telling me it's not your fault.
Yep.
It really happened. That really happened. When I woke up, I believed it. It was I still mourn it. I mourn his death. But for 2 years on his birthday, I was a mess. Afterwards, I can remember him with a smile.
Mhm.
Um, it's very real. I mean, there's some real things that you can get help, and it could really make a difference for you.
Yeah.
And so, it is hard though, because when you're in that environment, you're going through things that are all about you, and you're going at a different pace than everybody else is outside that you hurt.
Mhm.
And that was the hardest part, I think, for me in my relationships at that time. It's not all rose petals and everything's fixed. There's still a lot of work to be done,
Yep.
but maybe you're more capable of doing that. I mean, you are, once you've really dealt with those things.
Mhm.
And so anyways, a huge endorsement for just really some creative therapy and really thinking outside the box. And I just would hope that anyone who finds themselves in the place before they did the things that they can't undo, that you would really work hard to consider, this whole conversation, all the things that can be done, and the conversations that do need to be had. Because if not, you'll deal with all this other trauma, and then you'll have to spend the rest of the next several years dealing with the new trauma you created, which is where I've been the last 2 years.
I can't wait to talk about that more.
Yeah.
I wonder if this is a good place to pause to kind of think about, if you're listening to this, I think to hear that you aren't guilty, regardless of where you are, that you might have made intentional choices that you can't take back, that you regret, but that there is a way forward.
Yeah,
and
there has to be
tools that maybe you haven't had access to yet, that can begin to set you on a path where maybe right now you feel like everything's kind of overwhelming or shut down, that no matter where you are, I mean, you really touched on every type of trauma in your first, we talk about, one of the things I talk about with patients a lot is like the top 10 biggest things that cause a life crisis. And you literally named all 10. So regardless of where you are in any of those, that if you stop at guilt, you don't grow. And I think when you said that about, I felt so guilty, what I heard is you were disconnected from yourself. You lost trust in yourself. And when we lose trust in ourselves, it's impossible to trust other people. Even if we're clinging to them, there's really a lack of trust. We have to trust ourselves first. And so I think finding your way back to that, I get so excited about hearing more about the last couple of years of your story.
Well, and it's important when you're to understand, starting with yourself. I think everybody knows that, but it's hard to really accept that, to be okay with that. Especially in relationships, because you cannot tell the truth to other people when you're lying to yourself. And that order, and then coming back into real life is really hard. And especially, trying to move forward and not move on. Does that make sense? I think moving on ignores your past. I think moving forward builds on your mistakes. It still honors your past. It says, no, you can't take away those 2 decades that were good. And you build on that, and you become better for yourself and for those around you, or those who are still around you, or new relationships and new friendships. And hopefully you're not just back to who you were, but maybe somehow you're way better, more trustworthy, even though, you feel like maybe you can never be trusted again, or more dependable when you were the most undependable at one moment in your life. And so I think that's a constant journey, right? That you continue to build.
It is.
Probably.
Well, I know we're going to have him on for phase 2 of this to talk about kind of the last 2 years, and also the excitement and the energy and just power that he's bringing into what's coming, not just where he's been, but gives me chill bumps. But I think what I really—
You're so optimistic, Allie. That's so awesome. Thank you.
No, I really do.
I'm kind of like limping into next week, and you're like, I can't wait to see next week. I'm like, well, okay.
Like all this, I don't know, power. Yeah. But I think what I want to kind of speak into you specifically as we wrap up today is, I was imitating my mom for Chuck earlier before we started. This is a weird rabbit trail. But one of the things she always told us growing up was always tell the truth. Always tell the truth. And I remember being like, okay. And then when it got hard to tell the truth, I heard that voice, but I was like, shit, I cannot tell the truth. And I think one of your superpowers, and also one of the things that really was kind of that thread that we talked about in the beginning between you and I, was, man, this guy's telling the truth. And when you have been through a lot of stuff, you recognize when somebody's telling the truth, and you also recognize the courage that it takes to tell the truth. And I think when you start with your foundation of truth, it's going to be so hard. It's going to be so painful. It's going to feel intolerable, but you can grow from there. And when you were saying you can't be honest with yourself, you can't with other people, I'm sure you have not done that well forever. But in this moment, I really respect that in you, your conviction to be honest.
Allie, thank you. And truth is so refreshing, right? But it's just that's such an embarrassing topic for me. Because in the middle of all of it, it was just so untruthful, you know?
Yeah.
And then even now, it's so embarrassing that, you know, you still bend to try and tell the best version of every bad story.
Right.
You know? Like the details that they're really irrelevant to the rest of the world, but they're very painful to those who are involved. You know, it just feels like it's hard to be told what you just told me, but thank you.
Yeah, you really do it beautifully. And the fact that you're limping is what makes it so beautiful. When we are truthful, and I think that's like why I want this so bad, because the power that I experience in my office every 45 minutes all day long is like, gosh, if people could feel this,
Right.
we would have chains, literally. We would hear it all day long, chains.
Isn't it crazy? Isn't it crazy?
And we
you know,
don't feel like we can, because I think it feels embarrassing, but I actually think that's vulnerability.
yeah.
I think we feel vulnerable.
Well, I'm still embarrassed.
You
I do
should-
feel vulnerable, but I'm still embarrassed, and it's okay. I think it's okay to feel that, because I
Yes.
kind of feel like I should be, you know. But you're right. You're right, and that truth is what's really interesting to me. Is, have you ever been in an experience where you're holding truth back, and when you're exposed, even as painful it is, it feels a little relieving? Isn't that freaking weird? Like, that's scary, but it's really insightful to, you know, I think validate what you're saying.
So anyway, we could keep talking, obviously, but I've got to go to the bathroom. So thank you.
That's funny. The
Check
truth
this
behind
out.
the end of the episode. Well, we're going to visit again tomorrow.
So yeah, we'll do it again tomorrow.
And we'll
And
pick up where we left
I just
off.
really can't tell you again how grateful I am that you've been willing to tell the truth. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm trying.
Thank you for
Thanks, Brandon.
navigating us.
Thanks. Look forward to talking again. And
Of
I'm going to push the button here.
Yep, you're good.
So you can go.
We're done.
And Brandon, we'll talk soon. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Awesome.
Hello, Healing Centers friends. This is Chuck.
And Allie.
We are so thankful you're listening, learning, and hopefully enjoying our podcast. If you like this community and want to make it official, you can share the love back by becoming a Healing Center sustaining member. Simply go to healingcenters.co and click the link Support Us on Patreon. Even a $5 membership helps us keep this podcast going.
From our studios in Nashville, Tennessee, this is Healing Centers, a podcast where we talk to experts and leaders in wellness, mental health, physiology, fitness, nutrition, and any other topic that helps us get through the day with purpose and through our life with long-term success and health. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and please give us 5 stars wherever you listen to your podcasts. Visit our website at www.healingcenters.co to share feedback, suggest future episode topics, and find out more about the people on our podcast.